Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stuck in the Catch Fence. My name is Ryan Peters. I'm joined with Joe Spillman, or as he put it, Joseph, not Joe, Joseph.
Very proper. We're talking about
Very
F1
proper.
today. Go
And
ahead.
Steve, is it Steven or Steve?
Actually, the actual spelling and pronunciation of my name is German. It's Stephan. Stephan is actually because my mother was born and raised in Germany and married my father, who was a military man over there. And then we came back to the United States. I spent the first 5 years of my life in Germany.
We
Right
should
after,
really get to know each other more.
there you go.
That
But
that
yeah,
that was
so
like just out of nowhere. I never was expecting that.
yeah,
I
it
knew
is
that.
actually Stephan, Stephan,
Well, you are no longer known as Steve. You are Stefan.
Yes.
Stephan.
And Ryan, I knew that because I read Steve's Wikipedia page.
Oh,
Do I
that's
have
cool.
a Wikipedia page now?
What does my rap sheet say? Does it still say Ryan, Joe?
No, it
It
says
says
Sir Peters.
it's
Sir,
your rap sheet says inmate number 453
Yeah.
271 Folsom Prison.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. It's not my fault. But thank you for joining us again. We're like Joe said, we're going to talk. Joseph said we're going to talk some Formula One with Stefan and Joseph. So we're excited to start this off. You may be coming here and say, "I thought you guys talked NASCAR." We do. That is
Yeah.
our primary love. But we also like to watch other cars go really, really fast. So we're going to dive in to some Formula One action for this year. If you're looking for the most in-depth breaking down how cars porpoise and other type of things, this probably is not the best. This is just three Americans who, again, really like to talk anything that goes really, really fast and, kind of bring it from our perspective. Three backgrounds where we come from, not open wheel racing. I know Steve obviously likes IndyCar. Joe, you enjoy some IndyCar at times too. But our main love is NASCAR. But that doesn't mean we don't always like to, enjoy waking up at 6 a.m. Eastern. Steve doesn't even go to sleep sometimes to watch Formula One races. And, we'll show our love with that. So this is a season preview as well as a race preview, as this is race number 1 at Bahrain at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. So you get that double header, or what will be soon in May, a triple header when it comes to racing, as IndyCar will be starting, obviously later spring, early summer. But kind of diving in, and I want to show you guys the final results last year. We had a really, really good season a couple years ago between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. But last year, Max Verstappen with this brand new car, much like NASCAR, a lot of changes happened to the car in Formula One. And on top of it was Red Bull. And if you listen to Toto Wolff, the team principal for Lewis Hamilton and George Russell and Mercedes, he pretty much said we put all of our eggs in our basket to win that last championship. And it does come down to Max Verstappen ends up winning it on the last race, on the last lap. And then they said they were going to take a step back, and surely they did, because Red Bull pretty much dominated. Max Verstappen pretty much dominated, ended up winning the entire thing by 146 points. And the first conversation I want to have with you guys, and Steve, I'll go to you first and foremost when it comes to some of the Formula One talk this evening. Red Bull has now, looks like they've reclaimed their top spot in this sport. It was Red Bull before, and then it kind of changed until it went to a third domination by Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. Now Red Bull is back. Do you think it'll be closer this year, or do you think it's everybody else with Red Bull on top?
They've been practicing and running a lot, and you've been able to pick up a lot of that on the internet. You can actually get some of the practice sessions on Skype as well too, where they'll put those on streaming. These guys are very coy about showing their speed, showing their cars, their wares, what they have to offer. So far from what I've gleaned, Mercedes has put a lot of testing in, a lot of time with their car, which tells me they probably made some major changes to the aero packages and their engine package. There's a lot of technical rules that have changed that we can cover as time goes on. a lot of it has to do with the weight of the car, the ride height of the car, the weight of the engine, some gearbox changes that have been made. And then there's some grid changes that have been made in terms of grid penalties and things of that nature. Instead of going all the way to the rear, it looks like cars that are given a grid penalty will drop behind the last classified car, which means the car that finished 10th. Because the top 10 cars classify or score points as we know it. They call it classification in F1. So there's some changes like that. Interesting thing I picked up on, they're going to experiment in qualifying now with a couple of races. They have not named the races yet, where they're actually going to mandate what tire you can use to qualify. Like session 1, you have to use the hard tire. Session 2, you have to use the medium tire. And session 3, all drivers have to use the soft tire. And I thought that was a pretty neat change to where they're going to make you, to advance, you're going to have to drive on all 3 tires, things like that. But there's a lot of changes like that. So, to your original question, I don't think Mercedes is going to sit on its 7 years of laurels and take the pounding that they took last year and lose in a very controversial call the year before to Red Bull. So I would venture to say Mercedes AMG is out for some blood. George Russell is a formidable driver. He's had 1 year in the seat of a Mercedes now. He actually outscored Lewis Hamilton last year points wise. So I think Mercedes is poised. Ferrari's always an enigma. I think that you made the comment, Joe or Ryan, that they can't get out of their own way sometimes, and it still seems to be the case for them. Or last year, we'll see what they come up with this year. It seems to me they have the lure of Ferrari, but they just constantly seem a little mismanaged. So we'll see. Red Bull definitely is riding high and mighty right now. They've got great drivers, 2 great drivers. They've got Honda behind them, Honda technology. So they're the team to beat still until somebody beats them. But if I was going to put my eggs in a basket that we were going to see a big duel this year, I'd say it's probably going to be between Mercedes and Red Bull.
Right. Well, Joe, kind of going it from a NASCAR perspective, last year we had a brand new NASCAR. Last year we had a brand new Formula One car. It seemed like, all the technology and the advancement of that car was owned or, ruled by Red Bull. Do you think going into year 2 that the competition will get closer to Max Verstappen? Or do you think Red Bull has put up, at least obviously 146 point advantage last year? Do you think it stays closer to that, or do you think that everything comes more to the mean this year?
Well, I think you saw at the end of the season last year, Mercedes and George Russell really started driving well and competing. I think the last couple of races, George Russell was actually in contention to win, coming down to the wire. But, I really can't give you much of an educated talking point on this subject. As you guys know, I recently, in the last couple of years, started watching F1 more attentively, and that is mainly because of some other racing styles. And actually, Ryan, you suggested that I start watching F1, and that was coming off the 2021 season, I believe, that came down to the last race of the season. And, I really paid attention to it last year, mainly because I love auto racing, this is a different style of auto racing. It's much like I have a very American perspective on this sport as well, though. There's a lot of things within F1 that I just don't agree with. Some of the penalties for overtaking, some of the cautions, the virtual cautions, things in this sport that, are just kind of mind-boggling to somebody that has grown up and progressed with NASCAR and made that the dominant auto racing sport in their life, along with, of course, you guys know I'm a huge dirt track sprint car fan as well. But, the more I learn about this F1 sport, the more educated I'm becoming. And it seemed to me last year that basically The entire F1 season was a 2-horse race between Ferrari and Red Bull. Mercedes made, had a little hit a little lightning there at the end of the season, but really they weren't ever a competitive team. So, I'm trying to really get a grasp on the ins and outs and the understanding that, trying to get over my initial thoughts of F1 just being a pay to play sort of race and compete. So that's where I'm at right now. So as far as where the advancement's going to go with the new car, I really, without just purely gossiping about it, I really can't give you an educated answer on that. Maybe you could help me out.
Okay. No, I just the only thing that I think is, obviously the more time that people have to research something, the more time that R&D advances, I think that helps everybody compared to it's hard to, how do I put it? Like you said, it is a pay to play sport. I mean, the team that is at the very top spends exponentially more than the team at the bottom. That is much different than NASCAR. NASCAR, everybody essentially gets the same car and then says, whoever ends up being the better driver wins. And in this sport, you can spend almost as much as you want, even more than what you're allowed to spend. And they essentially slap you on the wrist with another financial penalty, is what we've seen previously. So you're right, Joe, that is much different. Speaking it from this standpoint, Joe, we put out a short the other day, and it was Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson wrecking. Well, a Formula One fan commented and goes, "I can't believe that Kyle Larson didn't get a grid penalty for essentially wrecking his teammate,
Right.
and what kind of team orders there were." So it's fun to also conversate with those type of fans that don't watch NASCAR and go, how the hell does this guy end up not only forcing his teammate to wreck, but also gets the win? So, we're going to have a back and forth. I hope we build up a good enough audience so we can talk about those differences. And, again, I'm a connoisseur of this sport, but I'm certainly not an expert. I'm certainly much well versed in NASCAR than I am in Formula One. So this is going to be a learning experience for a lot of Americans in general. And a lot of people just now started tuning in due to the Drive to Survive, which happened, Netflix hit special. And, that really what captured my, love for watching this sport as well. But Steve, I want to move it on to you with this next topic, and you can kind of go with me here as I'm going to share the drivers that we have for this year. And the first time we've had
but before we go there, can I make a couple more comments real quick? Would that be possible before we go to the driver's side?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a couple of things to point out that people need to realize about F1 and the pay to drive thing. F1 is unlike, as we kind of alluded to it, unlike NASCAR in the sense that the teams own their own engines. The car manufacturers own their own engines. It's not like NASCAR where Hendrick makes a motor, TRD makes a motor, and Ford Power makes a motor, and everybody gets those and can not play with them very much. F1's completely different in the sense that Ferrari keeps all their information on their engine in-house, as does Honda, as does AMG, as does Williams, and whatever engine they're using. There are lease programs to buy engines or lease engines from AMG, from Toyota, wherever. But F1 is unique in that the outside manager of the race itself or the overall series does not control. They put restrictions on horsepower and weight and things like that, but they don't generally control the internal combustion, the internal workings of an engine like or NASCAR does. Secondly, to Joe's point a little bit, is as we all know now, there's an American company that owns F1. I think it's Liberty Media. Is that what it's called? Yeah, it's an American company. So I think what you're going to see, and we can already attest to that, and that there now are 3 races in the United States. There is Miami, there is Austin, Texas, and then there is now a road course in Las Vegas as well. So with the fact that this American company bought F1 from Ecclestone and his group, I think you're going to see an Americanization of F1 And what that's going to mean to the fans that want to get into it is, I think you're going to see more competition. I think they're going to try and NASCARize it just a little bit, and try and, I don't know what they'll do, but they see the success of NASCAR, as you brought up, and Joe brought up, in that by standardizing everything, it comes down to the drivers. Right now, I think that if you put Lewis Hamilton in a McLaren, I don't think he'd win another championship, because I don't think McLaren can build a car to compete with the Toyotas, or the Mercedes, or
The Hondas, you
Ferrari,
mean?
the Hondas. I'm sorry, the Hondas, or the Ferraris. So that's things we'll talk about as the season goes on, and to watch for as it develops. But I think you're going to see an Americanization of F1 to some degree, and Drive to Survive plays into that as well too, because it's basically it's an American version of what we perceive F1 to be like.
Well
Okay.
said. Actually, Steve, I was trying to get to the Americanization of that
All
by
right,
showing
my
the
apologies.
drivers, because we have something that we haven't had in this sport in quite a while, and that is an American driver. So you have right here, obviously, Red Bull stays the same. Um, you know, Ferrari, Scuderia stays the same. Mercedes stays the same. Pierre Gasly moves up to Alpine, as he was at AlphaTauri. And then you have Oscar Piastri, which that was like a huge thing whenever he left, because a lot of people thought he was going to McLaren. McLaren announced it, kind of like what happened in IndyCar, and he said, or I'm sorry, he does go to McLaren, but they were announcing that he was going to go to Alpine to fill in for their driver retiring, and he's like, no, I'm not going to Alpine at all. So he ends up going to McLaren, and which a lot of people thought was the best prospect in the sport in Formula 2. So he makes his way to McLaren, filling in for Daniel Ricciardo. You still have Alfa Romeo, but this is where it gets interesting down here. I want to talk about Logan Sargent, and that is an American that not only is going to race in this series, but also has made some statements that he believes in the next decade that Formula One will take over NASCAR as the most popular sport. Now, if you listen to me on the Daytona 500 post-race show, I told you that the Daytona 500 is 4 times more watched than the best Formula One race that's ever been watched here at all. And Steve, you made the comment that, well, now we have 3 races here in the United States. They're obviously trying to grow the availability to not only watch but consume Formula One here in the United States. Do you think having an American for somebody to root for, because we know how passionate we as Americans, as Yankees, are when it comes to supporting our own kind, do you think that'll help grow this sport to the point that it can be the number 1 watch motorsport in the United States? Or do you think that's just simply never going to happen because of the popularity of NASCAR and the fact that every single NASCAR race is here in the States?
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe. You can start off.
Well, I'm going to say, obviously, Americans are going to root for the American. That's what Americans do. As F1 stands right now, in my opinion, I don't think that you can get the sport of F1 to be as popular as stock car racing. And the reason for that is Americans they get petrified in sports. And you can look at this in any sport when you talk about people who dominate sports. When you talk about Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt, the people that have long runs and they win week in and week out in whatever sport that you could think of, the Yankees, when the Yankees were tearing it up and winning world championships everywhere, people love to hate them, and it turns people off. Americans love competition. Americans love the underdog story. They always have. The Gonzaga Bulldogs are a prime example of that. The Gonzaga Bulldogs were a college that nobody ever heard of. And back in 98 or 97, Steve, I don't even remember what year it was. They went on the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16 run, college out of nowhere, and that school blew up. to where now they're a perennial #1 team in the nation, top ranked 10 team in the nation, year in and year out. If you have a sport in this country that the same 2 or 3 drivers, 4 drivers, same 2 teams are competing week in and week out for the win, I think that's going to be very hard for the popularity of that to grow in America. And another thing that I've seen while watching F1 is when you go to a NASCAR race, we've all been, we all love to go. People that show up to a NASCAR race show up to watch the race. They are in tuned in the race. They watch every lap. They don't take their eyes off the track. Although I've never attended an F1 race, as I understand it, it's probably a little bit out of my price range right now. But it doesn't look,
certainly out of my price range. Yes.
So it doesn't look to me like people show up to actually watch the race. It looks to me like they show up to party. So I kind of think that F1 is more of an atmosphere, more of a talking point, more of a place to go, even worldwide than what NASCAR is. Because like I said, NASCAR fans go to watch a race. Now, if what Steve is saying is true and they're going to try to make NASCAR more competitive or F1 more competitive, and I think the word he used was NASCARize it, which is a very good word to use, Steve. I think maybe it can grow and it has the potential to grow to where people are going to watch that and watch the competitiveness of it. But right now, I don't see a whole lot of room for growth with a sport that is just not competitive. When you look at purely, you and I both like to put a little money down and gamble on auto racing and NASCAR, and it's so fun because even the favorite in NASCAR is always at plus odds. Even the favorite's an underdog in NASCAR. In F1, that's the only real form of racing I've ever seen that the favorite is at negative odds. You know, you'll have a negative 112 for Verstappen to win a race, and it's like that's just mind-boggling to me in an auto race. It's like there's no variables there. This guy is supposed to win. He's gonna win, and it's gonna be a huge upset if he doesn't. So, having said all that, and kind of thinking about where the direction of this is going in America, I think that you are going to have to make it more competitive between the teams in order to get more viewership and for Americans to really catch on to this. Go ahead,
Stephan.
I'm going to start by saying this. Ladies and gentlemen, watch the F1 show because there is going to be a lot of disagreement about how things are run between NASCAR, F1, and the value of F1 in the United States. I do not agree with Joe's theory, comments, I love Joe, but I think that I have watched F1 since it's been on TV, long when it was shown on God knows what channel at 3:00 in the morning when you couldn't get it tape delayed. You had to actually get up at 3 in the morning and watch it. And I've stayed with the sport, and to say that fans go there to party, yeah, the F1 atmosphere is a definite European atmosphere. It is quite different than IndyCar or F1. But if you look in the stands in an F1 race, the stands are always jam-packed for practice, qualifying, and the race. And if you watch the stands, they are pretty well color-coded with massive flags flying, and all the Ferrari fans show up in red, all the Red Bull fans show up in orange, and all the Mercedes fans show up in green or black. And they have their flags, they have their hats. They get behind their teams much more, I think, than NASCAR does. NASCAR, you got a bunch of bubbas in the stands with their Kyle Busch shirt or their Chase Elliott shirt or whatever they're for, but they're not sitting together in a section. They're not unified at all. F1 has nailed that in terms of fan support. So I think it's there. Do I think this American driver is going to be the savior for NASCAR or for F1? No. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Ford is putting a team into F1 next year. That is correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
If they don't quit losing money on Wall Street, yes.
That's going to be the start of Americanization into F1. Haas has a team in there now, but it's basically an American-owned European team. Ford's coming in as an American team They're talking about hiring American drivers to race and will be a fully funded American team in the F1 series. Now, Ford has the money of any team in F1 right now to put their technology and their wherewithal. Do they have, the sharpness of the F1? I think it'll take Ford 3-4 years to get really competitive in the F1, but I don't see Ford as a company that's not going to do that. That's when I think Americanization of F1 will really occur. But I think that because F1 is an American-owned company, they are going to continue to push, and they're going to talk about Ford. You're going to hear Ford's team mentioned a lot this year. One American driver is not going to Americanize F1. And this kid is with a pretty crappy team, I think, and is really not going to be competitive. He's going to be at the back of the grid most all races and probably be a non-classified car 95% of the time. It's just the nature. It's the nature of the beast.
You made my point though, Steve, with the Americanization. Let me ask you this, and I want a yes or no answer. Does Yuki Tsunoda have a chance to win an F1 race this year?
No.
Okay. Does Corey LaJoie have a chance to win a NASCAR race?
Yes.
Okay.
He can win Talladega. He can win Talladega.
Exactly.
Go back to Daytona.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's my point.
Yeah.
You have I don't know how many teams off the top of my head in F1. 10. You have 10 teams in F1 with 2 drivers apiece, and you're going to sit there and tell me that Logan Sargent, Yuki Tsunoda, neither one of them have a chance to win an F1 race this year.
Right.
And that turns Americans off because Americans, as I said, love an underdog story. Americans don't like watching the same person win week in and week out, or the same 2 people win week in and week out. That's why everybody hated Kyle Busch. That's why everybody hated Jeff Gordon. That's why people didn't like Dale Earnhardt, because they win week in and week out, and fans get turned off to that because they want to see somebody else to win. That's Americans. We've always been underdogs. We've went into every war we've ever fought in this country as the supposed underdogs up to World War II, and we came out a winner. And that is the mentality of Americans. And when you put a sport in front of them and say, these 4 guys have the only chance to win this race, and at the end of the day, this other guy right here, the Mercedes driver, Jesus, what's his name?
Logan or
George Russell.
Russell.
George Russell, Lewis Hamilton. They may have a long shot to win a race, but they're probably not going to win. We have 4 drivers here that are going to win this race, and that's just how it is. Americans are going to be turned off to that. And until you could get to the point where all 20 drivers that are showing up for an F1 race have a chance to win, I don't think you're going to get the viewership in America that you're thinking that you're going to get, Steve.
As I preferenced everything by saying, ladies and gentlemen, watch this show because we are going to disagree on stuff. I do not believe, I think your comments are well taken for a NASCAR race. I think right now people have an infatuation with F1 based on the TV show. They're coming in. They want to get to know Lewis Hamilton, Max Schumacher, George Russell. They're going to want to get to know these drivers. They're going to want to see the European lifestyle. I don't think really they're going to care too much about who wins the races. I don't think that's the audience that F1's going for right now. I think they go for an entirely different audience than what NASCAR attracts. I think that eventually it'll come down to that. But I know in the last 2 years there have been more passing since this Liberty Media took over. There's been more passing in F1 than in the history of the sport in the modern era of
not up
of
front,
F1.
In the middle of the pack, but not up front.
Yeah, and really, last year Schumacher dominated, but the year before there was duking it out battles between Verstappen. I'm sorry, Verstappen and Hamilton. Every race was a bloodbath between those 2. Hell, they were wrecking each other. Right. Yeah, those 2. Well, and that's all we were interested in because that's all we were watching to win. It was as Joe was saying, that's what we were watching to win. So there was passing going on in the classifications too. But now this past year, there was passing still going on in the classification section, but the Red Bulls were clearly dominating. If it wasn't Verstappen, it was Perez. No doubt this was their year. It may happen again this year. I don't know. You cannot tell anything based on the practice because the F1 teams are so damn coy with what their speeds are, what their power is. They just don't show that. They don't show it in anything. So we're going to have to wait and watch Bahrain, watch Saudi, watch Australia, watch Miami before we get any feel is if there's going to be competitiveness in the series this year or not. But I don't know that the kind of competitiveness in the first couple of years of F1 coming to the United States in a really marketable way. Before we just showed the races on ESPN, sometimes at 3 a.m. Sometimes they'll even tape delay it. Like, I don't know if Bahrain's not even tape delayed at 10 o'clock start for Bahrain on the other
It's
side
a night
of the
race
world.
there.
It's a night race there. Okay, that explains it then. It's right. It is. They do have lights there. So that explains the 10 o'clock start. Otherwise, you're like me in California, which is 3 hours behind you guys, getting up at basically 3 a.m. to watch a race. And I'm up. I literally set my alarm and get up and watch the race because I like to watch it live because I don't want to hear on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever that Verstappen won another race,
Yeah.
which is what you got all of last year. So, Joe, we'll friendly differ. I don't think it's fair to compare F1 to NASCAR. They're two different worlds. They're completely different worlds. They're completely differently entrenched.
Right, but the question was, how does this sport grow in the United States?
And I'm not
that was the question.
It's going to grow. It's going to grow because it's a different atmosphere. It's going to draw a totally different crowd. I'll tell you, if I was concerned, I wouldn't be concerned if I was NASCAR because I don't think F1 is going to dip into NASCAR much at all. I think F1 is going to eat up IndyCar as they continue to grow.
Let me turn it this way, Steve.
Okay.
We've had the global sport in soccer, and all along we've always talked about how soccer is the global sport. It's the A1. It's the number one sport of all. And no matter what happens, no matter the growth, it does not ever come remotely close to being the most popular sport here in America. I mean, not even close. The number one athletes don't want to participate in it. They want to participate in baseball, football, and basketball. And I think the same thing is going to happen to Joe's point until we get a really, really good driver that decides he doesn't want to race in NASCAR anymore and he wants to go to Formula One, that they have something to follow. I just don't see this sport growing that much because also to that standpoint, what Joe mentioned, it is a really hard sport to watch in person. So if you're going to watch it in person, you're going to see 1/20th of what you could actually witness on TV. No other sport.
Well, that's a road course. That's any road course.
Yes, that is Formula One. Nothing but road courses.
And NASCAR now has 6 road courses.
I understand that, but that's not where it makes its living. It's not making its living on road courses. It's just kind of a teaser for other types of racing that is now gone to. 90% of NASCAR's races are on ovals, whether that's, short ovals, small ovals, 2-mile ovals, whatever it may be. But you can ingest the sport of NASCAR by being there because you get to witness it. The sport you do not get to witness. So to Joe's standpoint, it's like, well, if I can't watch, only the and then that's it. Well, I got to do something. I'm going to drink, watch it on the television screen. And last year I signed up for tickets for the first ever Miami race. And for me to go to practice, like you're saying, a general admission to practice. No, it was $500.
$500. Okay, yeah.
At GA for practice.
The rich man's sport.
That is completely different than what NASCAR fans are accustomed to.
There's
a reason. I understand. I'm getting to that. Let me speak. I have been very quiet. So, I think both things have to happen. That, I think the American, for it to grow, they need somebody to grow with. And I don't think Logan Sargent at Williams is that person. Now, if you told me, let's just take this example, that Chase Elliott was dropping out of NASCAR and was going into Formula One, I think you immediately have an opportunity as an investment for its fans to go, well, shit, I want to see how he does. Because what happened in the IndyCar? When Jimmy Johnson, who wasn't worth a damn at the end of his NASCAR career, goes into IndyCar, There's more than one. Joe was one of them that watched IndyCar races to see how Jimmy Johnson did and put money on him even at that. You as well. So I think NASCAR has to have its number one product move somewhere to where Americans will follow that face, that person, because Logan Sargent is just another guy to most fans in this country. And more often than not, Americans do not hang on to just another guy. The same thing can be said about soccer. We hoped Christian Pulisic would be the savior for soccer and get that reputation back for Americans. He's just another guy across the pond. And I think until we find a driver that fans can hold on to, most people are going to have Joe's perspective. Not all, I'm in between. I like watching it. I'm not going to go pay $600 to go watch practice because I think that's asinine. But I think it has to have someone that they can connect to from the heart standpoint. Otherwise, it's just going to be what most people perceive as a rich man's sport where you can't end up watching you got a better seat at home. And the best thing about Formula One, in my opinion, is its TV broadcast. It is bar none when it comes to sports broadcasting. So why would I not want to stay at home and watch David Croft and whoever else is on there bring the best when it comes to sports broadcasting in the entire world, according at least to me?
That is, Ryan, I 100% agree with that. And that's one reason why I'm able to, even with my American NASCAR perspective of auto racing, that's one reason why I'm able to sit down for an hour and a half and watch the race, because the broadcast is incredible and they do everything right when they bring it to your TV. So actually, at the end of the day, I think Fox and NBC could take a page out of the book there as to what.
No, they need to take the book, Joe. They don't need to
they
take
just
a page.
they need to take the entire book, because that's something that they're doing right. Steve?
Multiple things here. We've turned a 10-minute show into a 2-hour show now. In terms of soccer in the United States, I believe I was president of our sports league, which was the largest sports league in Indiana before I left to move to California. Soccer is the most participated sport in youth in the United States. Far superior succeeds football, basketball, and baseball. More youth kids play soccer than any other sport.
It's because it's cheaper.
So yeah, exactly. That's exactly why it's cheaper. So the talking about why do Americans not participate in World Cup? For some reason, there's an absolute disconnect beyond youth sports to get American soccer players as good as European or South American soccer players. You understand, they don't have the organization in football. They don't have football. They don't have the organization in basketball. Baseball is too hard for them to get involved in. So most of the countries that do good in the European, the World Cup, that's the only sport they really have is soccer, to really come up through. So that's my answer to that. We fought soccer all the time when I was president of the Youth Football League. Just
until we get pros, and then we don't have to worry about fighting soccer at all.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think Joe, in terms of, I love the F1 broadcast because we've talked about this. F1 shows no commercials.
Yeah.
But my question to you guys is that going to remain the same as the Americanization continues? Is Liberty Media? I'm not 100% sure it's Liberty Media. It is something media. I think it's Liberty Media, but somebody could Google that real quick and find out who owns F1 right now. But I think it's Liberty. They're going to eventually realize, as you said, I think because of the size of the venues, they'll sell them out anyway, even at $500 a head. You may not want to pay it, but there are people in Miami that will pay it. You're not going to see a F1 race.
At least once.
You're not going to see an F1 race in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, okay? You're going to see it in Miami, Las Vegas, where the money is. It's a money sport. It's a money sport from the cars. I mean, a Ferrari is $350,000 to touch one. A Mercedes is $100,000 to touch one. You're not talking about Americanization. The Americanization is going to come.
What about a Honda?
It's an 81 Honda. How
81
dare
Honda. What about a Toyota?
What about the champion, the Honda?
The
Let's
Honda
set the touch
Accord?
one.
Steve, you
Honda
are correct.
Accord.
It's the Liberty
It's a
Media.
200 credit
It
score
is
to touch a
Liberty
Honda.
Media, yeah.
Liberty
So,
Media Group. You
I
are correct.
believe you'll soon start to see commercials in F1 races, especially in America with the 3 races in America. That's Americanization of autosports.
I don't.
That's why we don't like. I hope you're right, because I think that's, as we've all agreed, that's the fabulous part of F1. If you go and you devote an hour and a half to it and the race is over. I mean, that's it. They have a time limit. NASCAR or F1 runs a 90-minute time limit. If you're wherever lap you're on at 90 minutes into it, yellow flags or not, that's the end of the race.
Right.
There's no green, white checker, no crap
Which
like
Joe
that.
finds asinine.
I find that asinine.
I tend to agree with you, Joe, on that one. I think it's asinine.
If you're going to run 200 miles, you run 200 miles.
200 miles. I agree with you on that. But that's just how it's always been. They run a time limit, and that may be another Americanization that they change. We don't know. Definitely,
I think that we're giving
Ryan,
America too much credit for trying to change a sport that's a global sport. I mean, we're talking,
we'll see.
what, 12% of their races are in the United States,
Well,
and they're
no other
trying
country,
to do that.
No other country has 3 races.
Well, no other country is as big as we are. So, I mean, that's a part of that too. France is the size of Texas.
China's as pretty big as we are.
Well,
They can run
hold on.
Well,
and we're doing
3 races.
And we're doing exactly what I think is the reason why this sport will not take off in America. And Ryan, you just made the point, bigger than what it is now. I'm sure viewership will grow. Ryan, I started watching F1 because you nudged me into it. And to be quite honest with you, this is a whole nother subject for a whole nother show that we can't get into tonight because we'll be talking all day. And that is the marketing of the sport. One reason why I started watching F1 is because I started playing F1 on my Xbox. And I started learning the drivers, and that's one way that the youth are reached. And sports are marketed to the youth is through video games. But we're doing exactly what I think is the reason why that the viewership will not grow in America. We're trying to take a sport that is not American. We're trying to talk about a sport that's not American. It's a global sport. It's a European sport. It's a worldwide sport that's not huge here in America, just like soccer. And we're trying to say, we have to do this to the sport. The sport doesn't need fixed. It has global viewership. It's the highest rated racing platform in the world. This is what the rest of the world watches. So I don't think F1 needs to do anything. I think as Americans, we need to say, if we want to be a fan of this sport, then this is the sport that you get, and not try to change it. And I think that if it's going to grow, then Americans are going to have that perspective and not say, we have to NASCARize this sport, as Steve said. So, we're kind of making my argument here, and I'm the least knowledgeable out of you two in this sport and the history of this sport, and the progression of each team. I'm the least knowledgeable in it, but one thing I do have a firm understanding is how Americans act, and we're doing exactly what Americans do, and we're trying to take something that's not ours and say, by God, we're going to fix this until it's better, and then we usually just break it. So at the end of the day, if you want to be a sport, or if you want to be a fan of F1, I think you have to accept it as it is. Right.
I agree with that. I think that's why we don't compete in soccer, because we all sit here and bitch because we don't watch it for 4 years until the World Cup comes and goes, God, it's so stupid when they roll on the ground and hold their face. And it's like, well, it works. That's why all these other countries are better at it than us. So, I think to that standpoint, Joe, you're right. And the way that the viewership is covered here, the amount, if you go by metrics, the Formula One typically watching the United States is about as big as an Xfinity race, at least by TV viewership. So it has a long way to go for it to catch up to the United States. Now, we could always argue time of the races and all these different things if you want, but at the end of the day, an apples and apples comparison is a Formula One race typically has the same amount of audience number-wise as an Xfinity race. So if it is going to get to the point of NASCAR, it has a huge way to go. But yes, that was a very long segment, but I thought it was good, riveting talk between NASCAR drivers, NASCAR fans, and Formula
when
One
you're done. But one more point to Joe's point. there's got to be something in America for F1 or they wouldn't be coming over here. It's expensive to fly all those cars and all that equipment across the pond to get them over here and to run 3 races. And they're not doing it back to back to back. These 3 races in the United States are spread out, meaning they're going to go to Europe, they're going to come to America, go back to Europe, come to America, go back to Europe. And I think when they go to Austin, Texas, I think they probably do the South American swing at that point and stay on that route with Mexico and then go down into Sao Paulo and run races there. But Liberty Media has found something in the American market that they think they can expand their sport and capitalize financially on it. Because Liberty Media is a for-profit company. They're just not bringing races here for the heck of bringing them here. They see something in F1 that Americans are going to buy. Now, I agree it's not going to happen next year. I think it'll stay a local party in Miami, a local party in Austin with its barbecue, and a local party in Vegas with its high rollers. Probably half those people will come from Europe and fly over to Vegas to gamble, see shows, and to watch the F1 race. So it's going to take a while for Americans to come in. NASCAR still is going to be the dominant race, but there's going to come a point in time where IndyCar is going to be whittled down to the Indy 500 and a few road course races. F1 will overtake IndyCar pretty quickly, I believe. And then NASCAR will get into a duel with IndyCar, and I believe it's 2 different people watching both those races. Time will tell. I mean, we're speculating right now entirely.
It's not.
And actually, let me finish
people.
with this. You want to talk about American sports versus European sports? Y'all know baseball is a European sport. It's a derivative of cricket. It started in Great Britain.
It is not, Steve. That's a ridiculous comment.
It is a derivative.
Go ahead. Cricket. We're going to black flag him because that's a ridiculous comment.
Look it up.
Derivative of rounders.
It's rounders or cricket. Cricket, rounders and cricket.
No,
well,
it's
very similar.
Rounders is an entirely different sport than cricket.
All right. Well, it's a European. Rounders is a European sport too.
Steve.
Yes, Native Americans did not play baseball. You're correct, Steve.
Right.
So moving on from that, the only thing I would say to that, Steve, is this is just an investment, and investments require risk. And we found that 20 years ago when Chevy and Ford made investments, and it took the American government to bail them out. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in motorsports today either if our government didn't step in. So when it comes to taking risks, there is a part of it to where they could lose their ass on this, and that's a possibility with this as well.
Yes, it is.
Moving on to Bahrain, which is the first race of the year. And we will go through this pretty quickly because really there's just not a lot to say because we've already talked about how, close these cars or not close these cars are when it comes to the competition. But if you're wondering what Bahrain is, it is a pretty quick 3-mile track. There's 3 different DRS zones. And if you don't know what a DRS zone, essentially that allows your wing to open up and gives you close to 10 mile an hour faster than what you were before, as long as you're a second within the competition in front of you. So a pretty fast track in the middle of the desert. Typically we see some things that we don't typically see more often than not. I know last year definitely was an example of what we saw the entire year because Ferrari ended up sweeping the first 2 spots, and then Mercedes got 3rd and 4th, with Red Bull finishing in the top or in the bottom 5. So that being said, do you guys think that we see any surprises going into Bahrain, or do you think that we will typically see what we normally do, and that is the top contenders contend and the middle of the pack doing what they normally do, being in the middle of the pack? Or is there a team specifically that you're looking to say, I want to see if they've taken the next step when it comes to the first race of the season? Joe, I will start with you.
No, I'm just kind of, after watching the last couple of seasons, I'm really just hoping that Mercedes steps it up. I've become kind of a fan of Hamilton and Russell, and those are kind of the guys that I pull for. I know when Russell was in contention to win in a couple of races last year, I was cheering for him pretty hard. So I'm kind of hoping that they've stepped up. Mercedes has stepped up their game a little bit this year, and they're in contention and they're competing, because really at the end of the day, I don't think we see much more than that. I think I think 3 teams have a chance to compete this season, and obviously that's Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. And outside of that, I think you see the typical race. that you've seen every year at every track.
Stefan.
I would agree a lot with what Joe said. I think there's 4 teams. I think you got to throw McLaren in there. But in the first race of Bahrain, nothing's going to surprise me because we don't know. We don't know what development Mercedes did. We don't know what development Ferrari did. We don't know what development McLaren did to catch Red Bull. So nothing will surprise me the first race. The second and third races is where I'll be surprised. If Mercedes comes back as Joe and I both want, and they start competing heavily against Red Bull again, if Mercedes or Ferrari steps up and gets back in, then I'll be surprised. Okay, good. Now we're going to have a dogfight now. But the first race, I expect Red Bull to run away with it.
Okay. So the thing that I'm looking towards, and maybe it's because my boy Gunther, but actually I thought Haas took a huge step up last year. They were pretty much the laughing stock of Formula One forever. And at least since they've entered, and they decided a couple years ago, right before the pandemic, to go young. And they had Mick Schumacher, which is obviously the son of the great Schumacher. And he was nowhere close to what his dad was, at least in Haas equipment, and has moved on. And then they went with Nikita Mazepin. And say what you want, the reason why Nikita Mazepin was in a car is because Nikita Mazepin's dad had a lot of money in Russia, and they wanted to have a Russian driver. Well, obviously, the Ukraine-Russia war was a great way for them to say, hey, we don't agree what's going on politically, even though this has nothing to do with you. So they got rid of Nikita Mazepin. And in turn, they replaced him with, well, their old driver, Kevin Magnussen. And Magnussen actually showed out really well last year and scored a few points. The first time Haas has ever scored points in in a Formula One season. So going complete 180, they have now brought off the shelf Nico Hülkenberg. So it went from complete youth, 2 guys in their early 20s, to now guys in their late or mid 30s, early to mid 30s. And I want to see how well does that play out. Do they believe that this car is a more evening force, like Steve said earlier? Because you can pass in the middle of the pack. Unfortunately, what still remains king is clean air. And I don't know how you ever stop that in any motorsport. Clean air is always king. But unfortunately, they thought they maybe lessen that gap and may have increased it a little bit more. Maybe with kind of the things you were talking about, Steve, when it comes to aero, that will bring that down some. But in the middle of the pack, there was some really, really good racing. And like Joe said, at least this sport shows you the middle of the pack so you can see really, really good racing on Sky Sports and ESPN. So that's who I will be paying attention to see this Haas actually have a chance to finish in the top 5. That's what I would like to see, because that has been a team much maligned. Obviously, it's part of Gene Haas. They also have, some other type of investment, mainly, I believe, still pretty German investment, moving on from the Russian side of things. But I'd much be interested to see how does the kind of American team, like you put it, Steve, fare, this year, because I think there is a chance to grow, because there is a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of the middle groups went with youth. And more often than not, when you go with youth, you get struggling pains when it comes with it. So we shall see. Gentlemen, it's been a long show. We had a nice, wonderful talk when it comes to Formula One for some guys that like to watch cars turn left.
I had one
as
question.
Most people put it. Go ahead, Steve.
Let's tie this to the next NASCAR show. Who the hell is running Stewart Haas? Because Haas is over in Europe running F1. Tony's in the booth now doing broadcasting.
That's a good point.
Who the hell is running Stewart Haas Racing right now?
Chase Briscoe.
Chase Briscoe. Okay. Maybe they're going to hire Kevin Harvick to actually go in now and get out of the car and get in the front office and pull a Jeff.
He's Ford. In the booth next year.
Yeah, we'll talk.
He's in the booth next year.
We'll talk about this on. We'll talk about this on Wednesday.
On NASCAR show. Yeah. Okay. That's why I said that. I prefaced that by saying that. Go ahead, Ryan. Get us out of here.
You're good. I'm glad you guys tuned in. I hope you learned something. Again, this is going to be something that we're going to grow with this. The more we watch this sport, it's not something we're going to cover, 4 to 5 times a week like we will NASCAR. But again, it is something that we will cover, and hopefully you join it with us. If anything, we can all learn this sport together. Steve, obviously, you're the grizzled vet when it comes to Formula One. but I've been watching it for, 2 years now, going into my third. Joe, you're going into your second. If you've never watched this sport, give it a try and let us know what you think. You may end up liking it more, than any other sport. Go ahead.
For this segment, this show, the F1 show, I do prefer Stephan. So see if you can
Okay.
make that distinction.
Yeah.
Stephen NASCAR, that's great. That's an American name. F1 show, Stephan.
Stephan. No problem.
Thanks.
My name is Ryan. Sorry. With Stephan and Joseph. This has been Stuck in the Catch Fence. We'll see you next time.